Robservations with Robert, Meyer, Burnett.
But anyway, I think one of the most exciting things that has happened, at least in terms of fandom, being an imagination connoisseur, all of it, was the actual realization of the dream of Zack Snyder's cut of Justice League. Now, I frequently was accused of not being an ally to those that wanted to believe that this cut of Justice League, Zack Snyder's cut of Justice League, existed. Now, I always maintained, my position has always been, of course, there was a cut of Justice League, as there is a cut of every movie that ever gets made. They start editing movies on day 2, on normal films, on effects-laden films that require many thousands of special effects. They usually start editing a movie even before principal photography begins because they have animatics. And they're starting to cut together. Maybe the film editor is doing this. Maybe someone else, an assistant editor is. But there's now editorial being done even before a movie's shot, especially on large-scale effects films. So the idea that Zack Snyder shot Justice League and he was months into post, of course he had a cut of the movie. As a matter of fact, you could probably watch a pretty decent cut of the movie. But there was, I think, this idea that by saying you had a cut of the film, a lot of people interpreted that to mean, well, there's a cut of the movie that can soon be released or whatever. We've talked about this over and over and over and over again. I've been accused of not being an ally, but then because I work in the entertainment business as an editor and post supervisor myself, so I know what that means and where they are in that process. For whatever happens, there's always been all this disinformation. Somebody saw it, somebody didn't see it, there is, there isn't. First of all, to be clear, there was always a cut of the film. As Zack himself has said, multiple cuts of the movie. I've said myself, Tango Shalom, the film that I've recently completed as a producer and the editor and the post supervisor and the visual effects supervisor. Yes, it's a small film, but I filled all 3 of those roles, so I'm very aware of how post works. That said, by the way, if you live in the North Carolina area, it is at the Charlotte Jewish International Film Festival this week, so you can see Tango Shalom and tell me how I did if you live in that area. But anyway, so this debate over the Snyder Cut really was fascinating to me, everyone's take on it. Ultimately, my takeaway was, because the Joss Whedon, the Justice League version of the film was the one finished, I was dubious as to whether the Zack Snyder cut of Justice League would ever see the light of day, even though he had a history with Warner Brothers having multiple cuts of his films. The 3 different cuts of Watchmen, the 2 different cuts of Batman v Superman. So there's even cuts of 2 cuts of Dawn of the Dead, his Dawn of the Dead. So for me, as a post supervisor and an editor and a producer myself, I'm like, okay, the only way that there's ever going to be a Snyder cut of Justice League is if somebody paid for it. And as I postulated on November of 2019 on this show, I said, HBO Max is the first time I ever thought that the Snyder cut might ever get finished because they could pony up the cash to finish it. But also I understood that there were actors that didn't appear in Justice League, so there was contracts that had to be signed. There was all kinds of talent issues that had to be solved because it would be an interesting thing. Would it be a different movie? It is a different movie. That's why it's officially titled Zack Snyder's Justice League. And by the way, Zack Snyder did not get paid to do this version of Justice League. He was doing it because he wanted to, let's say, set the record straight. Anyway, all of these things have been speculated about, talked about. They've burned up the internet for the last 3 years. Today, Vanity Fair magazine dropped what I think is the definitive story of the Snyder Cut of Justice League, which I think is pretty amazing. Here is a photograph from this story. I mean, if that isn't one of the great behind-the-scenes photos of making a film, man, I don't know what is. If they ever make one of those great, like, Titan books, when they publish the making of books that I love so much, can you imagine the kind of pictures? And a lot of the time, Zack Snyder himself takes pictures on set. Here's a picture he took, I presume, from the reshoots for Zack Snyder's Justice League of Ben Affleck. This is a photograph that Zack Snyder himself took. And clearly, Zack Snyder has a phenomenal eye. What a great photograph that is. Really cool stuff. Here's a picture of Mara, of Amber Heard, that he took as well, presumably from the recent reshoots. As has been reported, there's 4 minutes, only 4 minutes of new stuff, scenes that they reshot that were not shot during principal photography. Anyway, thanks to our friends at Vanity Fair, and I've always loved Vanity Fair's coverage of Hollywood. We get a look into the Snyder Cut that I think is very much worth all of our time to go through together. I love the Hollywood issue of Vanity Fair. I look forward to it every year. This is from the Hollywood 2021 article, and I've always loved Vanity Fair's coverage of the industry. So I'll probably go through this entire article. I know some people criticize me like, Rob, why do you just read articles? Tell us to read the articles. Well, I like reading the articles. I have fun doing it. And so we'll see. This article is by Anthony Bresnikan, and this was published today, February 22nd, 2021. From, again, Vanity Fair's Hollywood 2021 magazine, Justice League, the shocking, exhilarating, heartbreaking true story of hashtag the Snyder Cut. Zack Snyder, the director of Justice League, has never seen Justice League. His name is in the credits as the filmmaker, but he's never sat through the version released to the world 3 years ago. His wife, Deborah, who produced the movie, advised him not to. In late 2017, months after the couple cut ties with the superheroic epic amid an increasingly demoralizing battle with Warner Brothers, Deborah Snyder sat in a screening room on the studio lot alongside Christopher Nolan, one of the movie's executive producers, as well as the director of the Dark Knight trilogy. She braced herself as the lights went down. It was just a weird experience, she says now. I don't know how many people have that experience. You've worked on something for a long time, and then you leave, and then you see what happened to it. What happened to Justice League was a crisis of infinite doubt. A team of executives who lost faith in the architect of their faltering comic book movie empire, and a director in the midst of a family tragedy that sapped him of the will to fight. Joss Whedon, a director from another universe, the Marvel Cinematic One, left the Avengers after 2 movies and crossed over to comics rival DC, picking up Justice League not where Snyder left off, but remaking it significantly with extensive rewrites and hurried reshoots, just as the studio demanded. On November 17th, 2017, the team-up between Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman, Cyborg, Aquaman, and The Flash didn't so much debut in theaters as crash into them. It was sneered at by critics, shrugged at by baffled moviegoers, and all but disowned by those who created it. Whedon has since been accused of unprofessional and abusive behavior on set. The director declined repeated requests for a comment. He left his name off the movie except to claim a shared writing credit with Chris Terrio, who had written Snyder's previous installment, 2016's Batman v Superman, Dawn of Justice. Here's another great picture of him on set. And here's Gal Gadot from Batman v Superman. Publicly, everyone close to the movie practiced their smiles and rehearsed their talking points in the hopes of doing no further damage to the project. Not that it helped much. The movie earned $657 million globally, which sounds like a lot of money until you consider the nearly $300 million budget, including the reported $25 million for Whedon's reworking, plus a conservative estimate of $100 million to $150 million in marketing costs. Factor in the sizable cut theaters take from the box office, and a return of only $657 million is a clear money loser. 6 months later, Justice League's box office was dwarfed by Marvel's own all-star showcase, Avengers Infinity War, which flexed its muscles at $2 billion. After their private screening of the Whedon Cut, Nolan and Deborah Snyder emerged into the light with a shared mission. They came and they just said, you can never see that movie, Zack Snyder says during lunch at his Pasadena office, a modernist series of cubes jutting from hillside that overlooks the Rose Bowl. Because I knew it would break his heart, Deborah adds, his wife. That might seem overly dramatic. It's just show business after all, but the Snyders' hearts had already been through a lot. The battle over Justice League was agonizing, but it wasn't the worst thing to happen to their family that year. Not even close. Professionally, at least, things have vastly improved. For years, DC fans and Snyder enthusiasts who worshipped his high-octane brawn fests like his Dawn of the Dead remake, his ancient Greek battle saga 3000, or 300, pardon me. It was not 3, it was 300 Spartans, damn it. And his twisted Watchmen adaptation beat a drum on social media demanding that Warner Brothers return Justice League to its original filmmaker and allow him to share his version of the movie. They dubbed it #the Snyder Cut. The fans could be clever, but many were horrifyingly toxic. All of them were relentless, and they grew more numerous over time. Last May, they finally got their wish when Warner saw the potential to leverage all the free publicity and do something unprecedented on its upstart streaming service, HBO Max. Now, I wanted to stop here and editorialize. Now, when I was saying that no Snyder Cut existed, the Snyder Cut of Justice League is pretty much unprecedented in Hollywood history because Justice League, the film, was done. You know, it's one thing for Zack Snyder, who is involved in Watchmen all the way through. He had multiple cuts of the film that he himself approved, that he himself worked on. Watchmen was released. It had, by the way, some great books that were released of gallery shots of the cast and the extras. There was the book of the artwork and everything. So Watchmen was a very well-documented, very supported film that Zack Snyder was able to finish not only the way he wanted, but he played ball with the studio knowing the film was going to be long. So the studio released a theatrical cut, then he had his director's cut, then he had his ultimate cut of Watchmen released to home video. So Zack Snyder had a very good relationship back in 2009 with Warner Brothers. That's why they allowed him, sure, Legends of the Guardians, the Owls of Gaul, and Sucker Punch. I think, in a way, both of those films are experimental films that Zack Snyder got the studio to let him make. And The Legends of the Guardians, I think, is a pretty wonderful movie. Sucker Punch is kind of insane. I didn't love it as a movie, but boy, I'm sure glad something like that exists. More power to him. And admittedly, I have a few Hot Toys figures from that movie. But it was a singular vision that Zack Snyder brings. And he does, I mean, of all the filmmakers working in Hollywood today, you can look at pretty much any frame of a Zack Snyder movie and go, you know what? That's a Zack Snyder film. Now, whether you love his movies or you don't love his movies or somewhere in between, having a real vision, an auteurist vision, and whether those visions are actually inspired by the comic book creators he's trying so faithfully to honor, such as people like, well, Dave Gibbons in Watchmen, Frank Miller with 300, or all the many, mostly Alex Ross, but all the many writers and artists that worked in the DC universe. Zack Snyder is definitely taking those images and putting his own spin on them, and that's something to be lauded. That's what we want out of filmmakers, and that's what we want out of art, something unique to them. I'm always saying on this channel, authorship. Isn't that what we really want? Something that is transportive. The funny thing, when anyone's working in a cinematic universe that involves comic characters, you as a filmmaker might want to bring your own spin to things, but you're also dealing with an audience's expectation. What they want is to see their version of the character fully realized. So you as an artist might be doing something that other people might not necessarily jibe with. You might not be giving them exactly what they want. And our fan voice is very loud. It goes far and wide in this day and age of social media, so it's rough. But I have to say that, unfortunately, what happened in Zack Snyder's case is you had a film with Man of Steel that opened very respectable box office. Of course, the studio expected more because, unfortunately, rather than do what the MCU did and really start building their cinematic universe, They had Batman. They had Christopher Nolan's Batman movies to look at, and they're like, yeah, man, we got to get that $1 billion cheddar at the box office. That's what their expectations were going in, because they already had The Dark Knight, and then they're looking to see what Warner Brothers was looking to see what Disney was doing, what Marvel was doing. Kevin Feige, Louis D'Esposito, and Victoria Alonso and the team over at Marvel, they were on a very methodical uphill journey doing something unprecedented in Hollywood history. And it's like, well, we've got the granddaddy and granddaddies of all superheroes. We should be making that kind of cheddar. Well, you also need the kind of visionary that Kevin Feige is, and Kevin Feige is not the filmmaker. He's not the director. He is the impresario. He truly is a producer in the David O. Selznick fashion. He's a creative, active producer who has the vision, and everybody is working underneath that vision. It's actually kind of the way things are supposed to work, I think. If you have one of the great producers that's working on something like that, all franchises definitely need someone like that. And I think as a fan of the MCU and as a fan of what Kevin Feige's been doing, I think no one has done it better. Makes me feel sad for the rest, quite frankly. But anyway, so that's what was happening. And you've got Zack Snyder, who has a singular vision, who has now been tasked with this idea of being the architect of the DC cinematic universe. And he had Christopher Nolan, but both Christopher Nolan and Zack Snyder, they're visionary talents. Their eyes are on the films they're making, not on the overarching design of all of this. And a studio executive, you can have a studio executive. Studio executives oversee things, but they're not visionary producers either. So what the DCEU or the DC universe, whatever you want to call it, was lacking was a singular producerial vision. Look, they have a great producer that works with Warner Brothers, Chuck Roven, who knows how to. He flies this plane. He can take off and he can land, and he can bring these giant unruly projects to their conclusion. But he's not a visionary. You know, he's a guy that gets movies made, but he's not the visionary that someone like Kevin Feige is. So the whole situation was a bit different and a lot more political. But let me just jump back into this article. Professionally, at least, things have vastly improved. For years, DC fans and Snyder enthusiasts. Wait a minute, I already read that. So, it's not uncommon for directors to lose creative control of big-budget studio spectacles, or for other filmmakers to step in. But it's unheard of for a studio to return to an exiled filmmaker and offer back the power and creative freedom it has yanked away, especially when some of the most beloved and lucrative characters in pop culture history are involved. The Snyder Cut's coming out March 18th. But they're very right about this. For the director's devotees, it's a Hollywood ending for a Hollywood story. But for the truly devastating thing that happened to Zack Snyder and his loved ones in 2017, there can be no fix, no do-over. In the throes of conflict with Warner Brothers, the Snyder's 20-year-old daughter, home from college in the middle of a long struggle with depression, took her own life. After 2 years spent largely focused on their other children and extended family, Zack and Deborah Snyder went back to work, a difficult but vital part of the healing process. When they spoke to Vanity Fair for this story, they were completing Army of the Dead, for Netflix, by the way, a zombie-filled heist extravaganza that will launch a new multi-pronged franchise for Netflix, as well as restoring Zack's original vision for Justice League. The latter will be a 4-hour event for HBO Max that will raise money for the suicide prevention programs that could help spare others the grief that shook his family. Their daughter's death was the reason the Snyders walked away from Justice League, realizing their fight and spirit was needed at home with their other children and with each other, rather than in a losing battle with a powerful studio. Now, she is the main reason he decided to come back. At the end of the movie, it says, "For Autumn," Snyder says, sitting in the shadows of a darkened editing suite, frames from the movie frozen on screens around him. When he talks about his daughter, the otherwise scrappy, jubilant 54-year-old filmmaker always looks away. Without her, this absolutely would not have happened. Zack and his then-wife, Denise Weber, adopted Autumn when she was 1, A little over one, he says, smiling at the memory of her wild energy. Still an infant, but crazy. Autumn was slightly older than the couple's son, Eli. They had 2 more children before they divorced. Snyder had 2 sons with line producer Kirsten Ellen before marrying Deborah, his longtime producing partner. In 2004, with whom he adopted 2 more children. The filmmaker has often said that being an adoptive father is one of the reasons he was so invested in the story of Kal-El, a powerful being who became Superman thanks to the love and care of Jonathan and Martha Kent. More than 3 years after Autumn's death, Snyder still slips between the past and present tense when talking about her. She's the only dork, he says of his family. She was the only fan. The rest of them, he shrugs. Today, Eli is interested in filmmaking, but Autumn was the only one of his children who matched her dad's kid-like enthusiasm for gods, monsters, aliens, and superheroes. She's super creative, he says. She was a writer. She was at Sarah Lawrence to be a writer. Snyder swipes through his phone to show a selfie Autumn took in the Letterman jacket worn by Ray Fisher's character in Justice League, a football star horrendously wounded in a car accident and rebuilt by his scientist father into the half-robot warrior, Cyborg. Autumn had been in therapy and on medications, but the depression remained brutal. She was always wondering about her worth. What is my worth? What am I supposed to do? What am I about? Snyder stumbles on his words, his eyes glassy. The conversation was like, of course you're amazing. What do you mean you're worth? You're worth more than anything in the world. And she would be just like, yeah. Snyder says Autumn used writing to vent her pain, to channel it into her words that might contain it or explain it. She adored sci-fi. Her main characters are always in this battle with things from another dimension that no one can see, says Snyder, but it's a serious war, and that war was happening to her every day. I think so many people are in that battle and they smile and they nod at you. The fact that a studio had lost faith in Snyder's ability to make Justice League seemed mundane and pointless after Autumn's death. It's such a lightning strike in the center of this whole saga, says Snyder, and in a lot of ways it has informed everything that we've done since. Now, it's important to say here, they lost faith in Zack Snyder, not necessarily because of Zack Snyder, but because the people at the studio had expectations they had placed on these projects that weren't necessarily being met. Man of Steel, while not a billion-dollar grossing movie, still grossed a respectable $600 and something million. Now, on the budget of Man of Steel, I mean, if they'd made it Man of Steel for $125 million or $150 million, maybe, but it was way above $250 or $200 million to be made. Batman v Superman costs a lot more than that, and this dark look at these characters was not necessarily, they thought, I mean, look, let me tell you a secret, and this comes from working at Warner Brothers for 2 years. As I've said before, I used to work, this is a long time ago, but I worked for Bill Young. I was a management trainee in the feature production department of Warner Brothers, which means basically I was a PA, but I was in the offices, the executive offices at Warner Brothers. Were all, back then it was all in one place, and I was in and out of Bob Daly and Terry Semmel's office, the people who ran Warner Brothers at the time, Bruce Berman, Mark Canton. I was in and out of those people's offices all day, every day. I hung out with the senior vice presidents and the people that were in charge of all of these projects. And I saw firsthand, because that's all I did was keep my eyes and ears open, and I was in those executive offices, in and out of them every day. And I'll tell you something that I learned. Here's what I learned about studio executives. They are very smart people. Most of them are Ivy League educated people that have business degrees. But they really have no idea what movies are going to work and what movies aren't going to work. Because they're not paid to be visionaries. What they're doing is they're looking at other things. This was successful, so that might be successful. And another thing is, you're always living in fear, because if you fuck up, if you champion a filmmaker and champion a movie and it fails, that could be the end of your career in Hollywood. So it doesn't exactly foster the studio system, the studio executives. It's not a necessarily happy place where everybody's like, oh my God, we're making movies today. Isn't this great? Isn't this incredible? I mean, somebody one day has got to write the great tell-all book about what it's like to be a studio executive. Not a producer, not like You'll Never Eat Lunch in This Town Again, not like Julia Phillips's book, but what it's like to be a real studio executive. And it's not just because I work there and I do, of course, I produced The Hills Run Red, our horror film. Joel Silver was our executive producer, and that was also produced through Warner Brothers. So I have definitely an affinity. I think Warner Brothers is the best studio, and it also has some of the best filmmaker relations, or it did over the last 50 years. Clint Eastwood, Malpaso Productions, has been on that lot for, I don't know, since the early 70s. Stanley Kubrick, Richard Donner, and Joel Silver had a decades-long run at Warner Brothers. I mean, Warner Brothers was the studio to have relationships with filmmakers, ongoing relationships. And Zack Snyder had that at Warner Brothers, along with Christopher Nolan. That's why they teamed them up. So here was a studio that had thrown in with Zack Snyder. They believed in him because of his previous work. Now, I'll tell you something. No one at a studio is surprised. No one comes into work one day and thinks to themselves or sees or realizes, like, oh my God, do you see what Zack Snyder is doing? The studios know on a daily basis what goes on in the production of a film. The department that I worked in, feature production, one of my jobs every day was to distribute call sheets and production reports. Production reports were reports on the days, how much film was shot, the time it was filmed, how many scenes were accomplished, what did they knew exactly where the film was at any moment. And then a call sheet is all the crews, the cast and crew that's shooting or that's working the next day. So my job was to distribute those pieces of paper to all of the high-ranking executives at Warner Brothers on a daily basis, which is why I was in and out of their offices every day. And sometimes I'd have to distribute 3 or 4 versions of those things every day as they changed. And then after lunch, the executives, and again, this was a long time ago, but all the executives that were covering their projects would go watch dailies usually from 2 o'clock to 4 or 5 or whatever. Now I'm sure it's all done online, but before they literally had to go to a screening room and watch dailies. So no one can ever say that, oh, we had no idea where this is going. The studio executives watched every step of the way as those movies were made. Everyone believed that Zack Snyder was the man while they were making Superman and even Batman v Superman. If you believe the reports, the first cut that everybody watched of Batman v Superman, the long version, I guess it would be the ultimate version, maybe it was a little longer, everyone loved it and thought it was going to be a monster hit. They don't know, because if you ask a studio executive, let's talk about Superman lore and why might people not like Man of Steel or not like Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice, most of them couldn't tell you. Now there are very smart studio executives, like people like Walter Hamada, who definitely know this material and know the lore, but their job is not to pour over all the comics mythology they can the way we as film fans can. Like, I've never been in a meeting with any studio executive that knew more about this stuff than I do, ever. And that's not a boast. That's just a fact, because studio executives have other things on their mind than surrounding themselves with action figures and reading omnibuses and scouring all the fan sites. It's just a different way. It's just a different way of life. You can't expect that. You know who you can expect that from, though? Kevin Feige. That's why he's where he is, because he's probably the only executive in the history of the business that has an intimate knowledge of what it is he's working on. Remember, he worked on 13 Marvel projects as a producer before starting the MCU. He saw what worked. He saw what didn't work. He worked for Richard Donner. He was learning the business, but he was watching one thing. Kevin Feige is focused on one thing in his career as a producer, and that is Marvel and the Marvel characters and all the different takes on them. Warner Brothers doesn't have that. And the people at Warner Brothers that were overseeing these projects, they honestly don't know. They think they know. They're looking at these amazing visuals. They're looking at the performances of all the actors. Everything looks good, but they don't know. So what happened with Warner Brothers is they're perplexed. Superman, Man of Steel comes out, doesn't make $1 billion. Why? How can you possibly look at this movie? What is wrong with this movie? Well, even the fan base it's one of the most divisive movies I've ever seen. People's takes on whether or not they like Zack Snyder's approach, and then he continues it with Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice, and all the people all the executives know is that Zack Snyder's approach is not what we'd hoped. It hasn't been embraced by the fans. It hasn't been embraced by the public. Now, but here's the thing. This is a course correction they wanted to make very late in the game. And the studio executives now, they're not interested in whether Zack Snyder's making good movies anymore, because the movies he makes are decidedly very accomplished films. And dare I say it, for studio films, they're out there. But so far he's been successful. But with Batman v Superman, and remember, the studio made him cut it down. You can't make this a 3-hour movie. So a lot of the problem here is a disconnect between a studio that really doesn't understand why their movies aren't generating Marvel numbers, and everyone's panicking. Kevin Tsujihara, the person at the time who was running Warner Brothers, is panicking because shareholders want to know, well, how come we aren't making that Disney dollar that the Marvel studios are bringing in? Well, because the Marvel studios carefully planned, and they looked and saw what worked, and they made a film, and if they needed to make an adjustment, they would. I mean, the funny thing about Marvel, actually not the funny thing, you gotta love the fact that they've embraced even movies that people thought were not as good as maybe they should have been. And this is not to be disparaging, but whether it was The Incredible Hulk, whether it was Iron Man 2, whether it was Thor: The Dark World, elements of all of those movies have continually showed up in the rest of the MCU. They've taken it all. You know, no one at Marvel is disavowing any of the movies they've made, nor do they disavow their filmmakers. I'm not including James Gunn in this statement because they wouldn't have disavowed him if Disney brass hadn't done it for them. Anyway, I just want to point out that at the time with the Snyder Cut, the studio, or with Justice League, well, we'll go on. Now, I just want to set that idea up. In 2010, when he first began working on DC movies for Warner Brothers, Snyder was promoted. Let me switch over here. Snyder was promoted as a visionary director, though critics sometimes differed. Even his hits could be divisive. He'd emerged from music videos and commercials with the breakout remake of Dawn of the Dead in 2004 and followed it up with the otherworldly, visually audacious tale of Resistance 300, which became a box office behemoth in 2007. Of course, remember, 300 was based on a comic, Frank Miller's comic of the same name, and Snyder was literally able to take what was on the page and give it life in, I think, one of the ultimate examples of great fealty to a comic book work, to a graphic novel work. Given his choice of projects, Snyder picked Watchmen, the iconic graphic novel that scorned the classic tropes of superhero storytelling and explored the corrupting nature of power. His 2009 adaptation upended comic book expectations, just as Hollywood was building epic new franchises. Snyder then made a pair of box office disappointments, a digitally animated adventure about warring owls called Legends of the Guardians, and the surreal and some would say sexist action movie Sucker Punch, before being called to take on a legend among legends, Superman. When it debuted in 2013, Man of Steel established Henry Cavill as an object of global thirst, just as 300 had done for Gerald Butler and his washboard abs. Snyder's twist was to prevent a conflicted Clark Kent rather than the sunny alter ego played by Christopher Reeve. Snyder's Superman was willing to kill for what he thought was right, which many longtime fans of the character found reprehensible, and though he still saved the world, he never felt like he truly belonged in it. The studio had hoped for more than the $668 million it made at the box office, but Man of Steel fared well enough for Snyder to get another shot, this time bringing Ben Affleck into the universe as Bruce Wayne in Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice. The subtitle was a giveaway. This would be a prologue to Justice League, a superhero crossover event that some moviegoers had been pining for forever. Like me. I was pining forever for a Justice League movie. Snyder wasn't just making big-budget tentpoles. He'd become the architect of the entire DC cinematic universe, and his casting choices continue to resonate. He chose Gal Gadot to play Wonder Woman in Batman v Superman and produced Patty Jenkins' standalone movie about the Amazonian princess. I remember Gal saying to me, "Zach, I was going to quit the business. I was getting ready to just move back to Tel Aviv and just have a life there. I was done with Hollywood. I was going to do this one more audition." Then she came in and I was like, "That's my Wonder Woman." Now she's the whole world's. As with Man of Steel, Snyder continued to challenge expectations and norms, which sometimes led to pushback from the studio and originalist fans. Aquaman, for instance, has always looked waspy in the comics. In casting the role for Batman v Superman, Snyder decided to forego the blonde hair and blue eyes of the comic book hero in favor of the long, dark locks and smoky gaze of Jason Momoa, who had come in to audition for Bruce Wayne. He's a Pacific Islander. There's a connection to the sea. What if he's Aquaman, Zach remembers thinking. Everyone was like, "You're insane. This is not a thing." By the way, there's Ray Fisher, I would assume. Yeah, here's another picture by Zack Snyder of Ray Fisher on the set. It became a pattern. The studio gave Snyder the power to go anywhere he chose with its most valuable characters, and he always went somewhere other than what they wanted, the director says. Still, to his credit, all the recent DC films have used Snyder's universe as a foundation, even Suicide Squad and Birds of Prey, which take place in his version of Gotham City. The upcoming Flash film will connect all the disparate DC films by ricocheting through multiple universes, with Michael Keaton's Batman appearing along with Affleck's. But harsh reviews for Batman v Superman demolished Warner Brothers' confidence in Snyder. Even the director's champions, like production head Greg Silverman, were worried. When Batman v Superman came out, and we did get a negative reaction from the fans, it was disheartening for all of us, says Silverman, now the founder and head of independent content company Stampede Ventures. Zack had made these movies like 300 that were such crowd pleasers. And that was our job, to make crowd pleasers. And here we've made a movie together, and it didn't really please the audience. Now, to be fair, this is exactly correct. The studios are in the business of making giant, crowd-pleasing entertainments. That's what they want to do. And Snyder's vision for these things might have been different, but I would say this. I think in the case of Batman v Superman, Dawn of Justice, the studio has to take responsibility because they released an inferior version of the movie. They once again were second-guessing based on commercial concerns. I get it. I understand this. But here's the thing. If you watch a movie and you think it's great and it's 3 hours, and then you decide, okay, well, with 3 hours, we can only get so many shows a day, and then you force your filmmaker to cut the movie down to 2.5 hours, and you've lost 30 minutes of the film, that doesn't necessarily make the movie better. What's really important is the movie needs to be, at least in my opinion, people say no one knows anything in Hollywood. I'll tell you this. It doesn't matter how long a movie is. What matters is you have the best version of that movie. That's the version you put out into the world. If you're only making a decision based on running time, you're fucked because you're not doing what you're supposed to do, which is make the best crowd-pleasing entertainment you can. And if you make that, if you build it, they will come, Ray. That's what you have to do. So if you have a film like Batman v Superman, Dawn of Justice, that works better in its ultimate cut, ultimate format, whatever, you release the best version of that movie. Look, the same thing happened, if I dare say, only because I worked on it for 2 years, to Superman Returns. They decided to cut a half an hour out of that movie because when they showed it to friends and family, they're like, the first 20 minutes of this movie doesn't have any dialogue in it. No one knows what Krypton was, so there's no Return to Krypton scene. I think the version of Superman Returns was better at almost 3 hours than it was the version that was released. Again, a studio call. A studio call. Another film that I believe underperformed at the box office because the studio was just buying into this, well, we got to have it to be shorter to get so many shows a day. Now, there is merit to that, obviously. However, in the long run, if the film isn't making people coming back and seeing it again and again and again, like the fans, people are saying, well, the fans don't matter because they're going to turn out anyway. That's true, but the fans also turn out 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 times if they love the movie. As good as I think Endgame and Infinity War are, it was because people like myself had to go see those movies 6 times a piece in the theater. So anyway, yes. So let me get back to this article. Marvel Studios movies, whose success exerted so much pressure on the DC team, hit on a formula. First of all, this is another thing that studios do. They're always looking at other out there. What about them? We got to be like them. No one ever gets rich in Hollywood following a trend. You have to set your trends, people. You have to set the trends. You can't follow in anyone's footsteps. You gotta blaze your own trail. That's what you gotta be. And that's what they were doing. That was another big problem at Warner Brothers. Also, they had an upcoming AT&T merger, so it's like, we gotta get that stock price up, boys, so we get our big payout. No, you have one job. You have to make good movies that make lots of money. That's your job. Don't worry about your fucking AT&T payout, motherfucker. What you got to do is you got to make sure your movies are good. Then you don't have to worry about your AT&T payout because you will have earned it. Earned it. But no, let's go look at someone else and what they're doing. Let me tell you. I've said this before on this show. Best advice I can give any of you. It does not matter how good someone is. Someone else is. It doesn't make you any better or any worse. Where did I get that? I got that from a low-budget Miramax movie called Pastime that director Robin Armstrong made, which is why I went to work for him. That was one of my favorite things I ever... Noble Williams says this to William Russ in the movie. I thought it was the greatest advice I ever heard. Anyway, so... Marvel Studios movies, whose success exerted so much pressure on the DC team, hit on a formula that mirrored their comic book roots, telling stories about relatable, everyday people grappling with sudden phenomenal powers. Snyder's DC universe approached its superheroes from the opposite direction, depicting gods and immortals who are at ease wielding cosmic strengths, but strained to be human and connect to the ordinary world. Right. That's the difference between Marvel and DC. The director envisioned this as operatic, tragic, and perhaps a more challenging type of comic book storytelling, but Warner Brothers feared it made his heroes gloomy, their abilities a curse. Once again, not true. Look at the comic book renaissance of the 80s, when everything went dark. I mean, I understand you don't have to tell always a dark superhero story, but making this... Zack Snyder was making a metal, like I said, it's a metal universe, but he was also doing something exactly that, operatic, Wagnerian, like Das Ring of the Nibelung. That's what he was doing, and via Alex Ross's imagery. But anyway, they bought into that, and they lost their confidence. They lost their confidence in their filmmaker. It's not like they weren't. And by the way, they didn't really lose their confidence. They only lost their confidence after the movies came out and didn't do what they thought. They thought that they had scored big because they weren't necessarily in touch with the audience. Let me go back to this. Diane Nelson, who was president of DC Entertainment at the time, and by the way, I'm a huge Diane Nelson fan, just so you know. Diane Nelson got Hills Run Red greenlit. I did some work for Global Brand Management during the time I worked on Superman Returns, and I love Diane Nelson. She's no longer at Warner Brothers, so I'm not trying to kiss her ass, just so you know. Diane Nelson, who's president of DC Entertainment at the time, says she appreciated that Snyder was more into deconstructing the familiar than just recapitulating it. Zack is a masterful visual storyteller who goes deep on individual characters, she says. For some people, that is amazing, and for other people, that becomes the problem because they have fixed opinions about who these DC characters are and are not. In 2016, as principal photography got underway on Justice League in the United Kingdom, rumors percolated that Snyder had been fired from the film. That didn't happen, but Warner Brothers' then chairman and CEO, Kevin Tsujihara, and a brilliant move, Kevin. This is the kind of move you do to really instill confidence in your filmmakers. Kevin Tsujihara did assign watchdogs in the form of DC Entertainment creative chief Jeff Johns and Warner Brothers co-production head John Berg. The edict was clear. At least one of them had to be on set every day. I am surrounded by the work of Jeff Johns. I'm a fan of Jeff Johns. I've been reading him for a long time. I read his entire run of Green Lantern. I've read most of his runs, Teen Titans, Justice Society. I've read a lot, hundreds of Jeff Johns comics. What the fuck is he doing overseeing Zack Snyder making a movie? Seriously, what the fuck? I understand he interned at Donner. It's not like he's somebody who's not he knew the industry, but he doesn't know about making films. He's not a filmmaker. Why does John Berg and why does Jeff Johns have to go sit on set and oversee Zack Snyder? What the fuck could they possibly tell him? Seriously, what could they tell him? I mean, I saw this, by the way. I saw this happen. I worked at Warner Brothers on Bonfire of the Vanities, and one of my bosses, a guy named Ron Smith, was sent by the studio to sit on the set of Bonfire of the Vanities. One day, Ron Smith just disappeared, and everyone liked Ron Smith. He was a very funny guy. He was great to be around, and they basically exiled him to do the same thing. You know, we've lost confidence in Fred Caruso and Brian De Palma. You go, and he was a sacrificial lamb. All the problems, whatever happened on that, was going to fall back on Ron Smith. I watched this, but let me tell you, there is nothing that is more disruptive to a director than having people that the studio has sent out to babysit him from doing his job or her job. So Berg, who's now production president at Stampede, recalls that duty as a low point. It was really tricky and not a position that I loved. I wonder why. To be honest, he says, I tried to be forthright about what I thought creatively. My job was to try and mediate between a creator whose vision is instinctively dark and a studio that perceived, rightly or wrong, that fans wanted something lighter. Okay, man, but this is a decision that needs to be made before you're on the fucking set. You see it in previs. You have it in the script. You know, I could even see that after Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice. Why not make it lighter? I can understand that. I can see that. But you know what? If you're going to have Steppenwolf and Darkseid and Apocalypse and the New Gods and have all the Justice League fighting against another extinction level event, what are you going to do? Sing Kumbaya? Sing a few Jim Croce songs? Give me a fucking break, man. This is the studio. This is not Zack Snyder. I was respectful. This is Berg going on. I was respectful of the director and didn't pursue things that were coming at me from the corporate side that I thought weren't in line with what would make the best movie. Listen, let me tell you something. I know creative, you loggerhead, you butt heads when you're making a movie with people. And that's part of the process, and it can be great. But when your employers, the studio, are overseeing the production of a film, and you've already made how many movies for that studio? And yet there's people from the studio going, maybe you should have a joke here or something. You have fucking lost. Whoever's running the studio fucked up. And it's the studio's fucking fault, because if you don't understand the direction of your own goddamn projects, that's on you. That's on the studio. And the studio, of course, they want to blame the filmmaker, because no, it's the studio that green lights these projects. It's the studio that knows and sees every shred of film. They see all the previews. They see what's going on. I mean, you can even watch it. In my documentary on the making of Superman Returns, I was at Warner Brothers. I was at Warner Brothers 6 months before Superman Returns started shooting. They had a beautiful art department that Guy Hendricks Dias was running. You could see giant pictures on the walls and things that were storyboarded and sets that were being designed. You could see everything. You could go in there and go, here's the kind of movie we're making. It's right here. It's not rocket science. If you have to send executives from the studio to sit on a set already, you, my friend, whoever's running your studio, you have fucked up and you didn't do your job. Anyway, Snyder knew why Johns and Berg were on the set. You could say babysit, he says. Many filmmakers would have bristled at the intrusion, but he was gracious. It didn't bother me too much because they weren't that threatening. I just felt that the ideas that they did have, where they were trying to inject humor and stuff like that, it wasn't anything that was too outrageous. But Warner Brothers did nix some of his more sweeping notions for Justice League, like adding a romance between Ben Affleck's Bruce Wayne and Amy Adams' Lois Lane, who was mourning Superman's death in the previous film. The intention was that Bruce fell in love with Lois and then realized that the only way to save the world was to bring Superman back to life, says Snyder. So he had this insane conflict, because Lois, of course, was still in love with Superman. We had this beautiful speech where Bruce said to Alfred, "I never had a life outside the cave. I never imagined a world for me beyond this. But this woman makes me think that if I can get this group of gods together, then my job is done. I can quit. I can stop." And of course, that doesn't work out for him. It didn't work out for Snyder either. The studio said no. And I'll flat out tell you, I've read a million Superman comics. I've seen all the different iterations of Superman that ever existed. But the idea that after Superman dies and he takes up with Lois Lane, and Lois Lane is the person that might save Batman's soul, I would love to have seen that in a movie. Let me tell you. Let me tell you. The downside of making epics is the studio's financial expectations. For Justice League, Warner Brothers wanted a big, round $1 billion in global box office, which Snyder's movies had never reached. In January of 2017, the director showed his first cut to Kevin Tsujihara. It did not go well, according to Snyder and others. Tsujihara, who resigned from Warner Brothers in 2019 amid a sexual misconduct scandal involving the aspiring actress Charlotte Kirk, declined an interview request. Yeah, man, you're head of your studios banging hot actresses instead of paying attention to your fucking movie. Story of Hollywood's life. Among the issues was the length of the film. There was a mandate from Tsujihara that the movie be 2 hours long, says Snyder. Why, Kevin Tsujihara? Why should it be 2 hours long? What are you basing that on? You have your script. You apparently watched all the previs. You're watching all the dailies. You just arbitrarily decided that the movie needed to be 2 hours long. Who the fuck gave you that idea? Seriously. I mean, seriously, why would you think that? What conventional wisdom tells you that? Look at the length of the latest Marvel movies. How long are they? How much money did they make? Anyway, that order had a paradoxical impact because it meant eliminating much of the heart and humor the studio also wanted, like a comical romantic subplot between Ezra Miller's Flash and Kiersey Clemens' Iris, the latter of whom was entirely absent from the Whedon film. On the day Vanity Fair visited his office, Snyder was working on finalizing the music for the restored scene in which the Flash rescues her from a car crash. Snyder also saw a bigger structural problem with the make it shorter order. How am I supposed to introduce 6 characters and an alien with potential for world domination in 2 hours? I mean, I can do it. It can be done. Clearly, it was done, he says, referring to Whedon's version, but I didn't see it. Reports that Snyder himself asked Whedon for help were false. Johns, one of the studio-appointed babysitters, had been planning a Batgirl movie with Whedon, and Snyder and the others say Johns recruited him to do rewrites for Justice League. John's representatives didn't respond to a request for comment. Once again, Snyder was gracious and even hopeful. I thought maybe he could write some cool scenes. I thought that would be fun. Soon, it became clear that Warner Brothers was giving Whedon more and more power. He would not just advise during reshoots, but also do some directing himself. Snyder says he only had one conversation with Whedon about the studio's notes. Reeling from Autumn's death and finding anguish in their work rather than relief, Zack and Deborah quit. We just lost the will to fight that fight in a lot of ways, said Zack. All of us, the whole family, were just so broken by losing Autumn that having those conversations in the middle of it really became, I was like, really? Frankly, I think we did the right thing because I think it would have been incredibly belligerent or we just rolled over. God damn right. First of all, look at that. You bring in Joss Whedon because, what did he direct from? Yeah, I know. Avengers and Avengers Age of Ultron. Movies I love, to be honest. I love Age of Ultron too. Both of them grossed $1.5 billion. So you get in a room. Zack Snyder gets in a room with Joss Whedon. Here's the guy that directed 2 $1.5 billion movies, and here's the guy that our filmmaker hasn't yet made a $1 billion movie, and we're giving a guy more and more and more power. Who puts their employees into that kind of a position? That is a losing proposition. Can you imagine how demoralizing that must have been? What kind of management? What kind of this is not good producing, people. A good producer makes sure that your director and all of your crew and all of your cast has exactly what they need to have to make the best movie possible. That's what good producing is. That's what good producing is. First, you find the great material, then you hire all the best people, and then you make sure those people are given exactly what they need to make the best film possible. Can you imagine if you're in the middle of making your movie and somebody brings in another director? There isn't anything more demoralizing I could possibly think of. And Zack Snyder's like open to it. I mean, I've seen him on the set. I haven't seen Quentin Tarantino and Zack Snyder seem to be the two people I've seen, at least in behind the scenes footage that admittedly has been released to the public, that look like they're having the best time in the world. And you give that guy, a guy like Joss Whedon, who comes in, doesn't have to say anything, walks around, I'm sure, and says, yeah, my last two movies grossed $1.5 billion. I can't even imagine. One by one, he called members of his cast and crew. I remember I was in a movie theater, coincidentally enough. Ray Fisher sat on the set of Snyder's reshoots last fall. I was walking into the AMC right in Times Square, and I got the call from Zack, and he was saying that he had to deal with stuff and the family, and he was having to step away. I had a trillion questions, and my heart sank. Whedon reshot about 3/4 of Justice League, from what Snyder can gather. When fans ask him about details of the movie that bears his name, he usually has no idea what they're talking about. Worst of all, for Warner Brothers, Whedon didn't exactly save the movie. When we got to see what Joss actually did, it was stupefying. Okay, here's a lot of people have been quoting this. When we got to see what Joss actually did, it was stupefying, says a studio executive who requested anonymity. I don't like this. It could be somebody in marketing. So, I mean, give me somebody higher up. And by the way, if this is your opinion, own it. Own it. Own your opinion. When we got to see what Joss actually did, it was stupefying, says a studio executive who requested anonymity. The robber on the rooftop, so goofy and awful. The Russian family, so useless and pointless. Everyone knew it. It was so awkward because nobody wanted to admit what a piece of shit it was. Oh, so you've already sabotaged Zack Snyder, then you've hired your boy Joss Whedon. It's not working, so now you're going to sit back and just what? Let the car run right into the wall? Oh, apparently yes, that's exactly what they did. Justice League opened on November 17th, 2017, and cratered. Because Cavill had been making Mission Impossible Fallout during the reshoots, Whedon's team had to digitally erase his mustache in Justice League, which led to a bizarre warping of his face. The jokes fell flat, and behind the scenes, some of the cast had revolted. Ray Fisher has publicly claimed Whedon was abusive on set and that Warner Brothers executives enabled his actions. Gal Gadot told the Los Angeles Times that she also had a negative experience with Whedon, which she reported to higher-ups. After concluding its investigation, Warner Brothers announced that remedial action had been taken, though the studio didn't offer specifics. Days before that announcement, HBO, a division of Warner Media, parted ways with Whedon on the sci-fi series The Nevers. Fisher continues to clash with the studio and has expressed dismay at the outcome of its investigation. Now, let me be clear here. I am not offering any support of Joss Whedon, nor being his defender. I've never met Joss Whedon. I've enjoyed the programs he's made. I don't know him as a human being personally. I've heard good things about him. I've heard not so good things about him and everything that's been coming out lately. But I also want to say, just for the record, the position that Joss Whedon was put in, they probably paid him. I don't know what he got paid, but he probably made more money on this one job coming in to fix Justice League than any other thing he's ever done. And he was put also in the worst position a director could possibly be put in. The pressure on him would have been enormous. Does that excuse bad behavior? Certainly not. Certainly not. But basically, Warner Brothers had created the worst possible and most toxic way to make a film ever. And it has to be understood, this was all bad all the way around. And the studio is entirely to blame. Entirely to blame. The cast were very loyal to Zack, and they were hurting for him, says Nelson, the former DC president. It would have been a difficult environment for any new director to walk into, the most difficult possibly in Hollywood history. I have no doubt about that. But then how Joss chose to handle it is Joss's to live with. In the aftermath of Whedon's version, a new narrative arose on social media. Hashtag release the Snyder Cut. Snyder gradually began to encourage the movement. But it was hardly the first thing on his mind. From the time we left, says Snyder, it was not a great year, but we did a lot of stuff with family. It was really important. An important year. That year together became 2. After grieving Autumn and starting to heal with the family, he began to work on Army of the Dead, a visceral, funny, and exceedingly dark smash-and-grab story about an elite strike team that goes into a zombie-overrun Las Vegas to retrieve a hidden fortune before the hot zone is nuked. The zombie virus emerges from Area 51, so aliens may be involved too. Let me just tell you that after reading that description, I am so all in the bag for Army of the Dead. Bring it on. No wonder there's a prequel and an animated series also, because boy, does that sound awesome to me. During a day-long interview, Snyder giddily scans through concept art for an accompanying animated series approving vehicles, otherworldly weapons, and supernatural beings. He makes suggestions for changes to his team of artists, all working remotely via Zoom. Behind him on the wall-length bookshelf, there's a frame with 2 photos. Autumn and Eli in their bathing suits as toddlers, beaming with the same smiles as their dad as he assesses his monsters. The Army of the Dead movie is a lot to tackle, and the related prequel and animated series even more all-consuming. Scott Stuber, head of original films at Netflix, says it's a chance to build a world with a filmmaker who's hungry to return. Zack went through something very difficult, and I think he's probably realized, like we all do, it's okay to be vulnerable. For those of us lucky enough to know him and Deborah, he's a very soulful, kind, thoughtful human being. He's got this facade of big action movies and all this bravado things, but there's a kind sweetness to him. By the way, again, never met him, but you can see that in the behind-the-scenes footage. At the time of stories of abusive creators, Snyder is an anomaly. Even executives who are sometimes at odds with him agree that he's genuinely nice. I'd be stronger than that, says Greg Silverman. He's a wonderful guy and fostered a wonderful working environment on his sets. He's really valued the crew. He values his cast. Snyder's movies tend to be about strength and what it means to wield it. Maybe it was the inevitable that he'd eventually not only join the Release the Snyder Cut bandwagon, but began driving it. Now, here's one of my favorite parts of this story. Let's read it together, shall we? When Snyder left Warner Brothers, he took his laptop, which was emblazoned with a Justice League sticker. On the hard drive was his original, nearly 4-hour version. It was devoid of visual effects, music, and all the fine-tuning that makes a movie a movie. It was also in black and white. To him, it was a memento. He thought, we'd just show it to random people who stop by, like our friends or whatever. That was the Snyder Cut as it existed when Zack Snyder left the project. A 4-hour version devoid of visual effects, music, and all the fine-tuning that made a movie into a movie. It was also in black and white. To him, it was a memento. He thought, we could just show it to random people who stop by, like our friends or whatever. That's the Snyder Cut. Like we were always saying, not a movie that could be released. And I'll tell you something else. People might ask, and I don't know if this is the case, but as an editor myself, I think the reason it was in black and white, because they shoot so much with green screen. When you're watching footage with lots of green screen, it's really difficult to edit that footage. But you know what makes it a lot easier to edit that footage? That's right, if you turn off the color. It works better that way, just so you know. I don't know if that's why they only had a black and white version of it, but I would assume that was the case. Because when you're trying to edit footage with lots of green screen, it's very hard to concentrate on getting those cuts correct. Anyway, that's just what I thought. So that's why. I mean, the film wasn't even in color. Rather than fade away, the demand for the Snyder Cut gained momentum over the years. Groups paid to have single-engine airplanes fly a Release the Snyder Cut banner around both the Warner Brothers studio lot in Burbank and the annual Comic-Con gathering in San Diego. Last year, fans pooled resources to buy a Times Square billboard. A noxious contingent of followers, though, didn't just advocate for the movie, but also used social media to attack people who were critical of Snyder or their cause. That happened to me, too. A lot of people still attack me, even today, about my thoughts on the Snyder Cut, even though everything I ever thought about the Snyder Cut has been confirmed, and especially this article finding out what the Snyder Cut actually was. It's exactly what I've been saying even since the beginning. So, yeah, there was a cut of the movie with no visual effects, no music, and it was black and white. But now it goes on. This is great. A noxious contingent of followers, though, didn't just advocate for the movie, but also used social media to attack people who were critical of Snyder or their cause. Maybe they hoped to silence dissenters, or maybe they were just trolls being trolls. In any case, by the way, I don't think, for the most part, even though that people have come after me, telling me I don't know what I'm talking about or whatever, even the most noxious people that came after me, they were not bad. These are not people, these are people that believe there was something about the Snyder Cut and Zack Snyder and the fact that we all of us, even the people that have been the most rude to me online, we have a common ground. And that is, we love this material. And it was always apparent to me, even the worst people that came after me, they believed in this project. And that's where their ire came from. If they thought that, for the most part, they thought I should believe with them. And perhaps I should. I knowing how the business worked, I think the methodology, I thought it was a lost cause. I never thought we'd see the Snyder Cut. Why? Because as this article points out, the Snyder Cut had a long way to go before anybody could watch it. But this goes on. Unfortunately, I think a lot of online fandom culture is headed in this very toxic direction, says Kaylee Donaldson, who writes for Pajiba.com. It's especially strong from Snyder Cut acolytes, she adds, perhaps because they misguidedly to the director's tales of loner heroes, because they respond misguidedly to the director's tale of loner heroes in a hostile world. I don't get this from the Birds of Prey fans or Shazam fans, says Donaldson. Well, there's a reason for that, Miss Donaldson, but I won't get into it. I got a little bit of Joker fans, but nowhere near the same level. Nonetheless, she's looking forward to Snyder's movie. I think 300 is great fun. I think the first 10 minutes of Watchmen are some of the best things any superhero movie has ever done. Even if she doesn't end up liking the Snyder Cut, she says, I would rather watch one person's chaos than a committee's snooze fest. Drea Letamendi, a clinical psychologist who explores superhero archetypes on the Arkham Sessions podcast. Ooh, I want to listen to that. I don't know that. Sorry, Drea, if I got your name wrong. Notes that fans get especially aggressive on social media when they feel they've been denied something. What I have observed is an enduring false sense of ownership, which can manifest as abuse, threats, and strong, intense reactions when a story doesn't go their way, she says. Fighting for the unseen cut of the film became a cause. In some quarters, the worst behavior metastasized. They're shouting and people are listening to them. Even if it's negative comments, they're getting positive reinforcement to continue down that path. Trolls may have actually held back the movement, like looters at an otherwise peaceful demonstration. Snyder cringes at descriptions of the abusive tactics. I 100% think it's wrong, he says. I don't think that anyone should be calling anyone anything. I've always tried to give people in fandom attention who do good things. Zack Snyder has been wonderful about that. November 2019 brought a sustained hashtag push on Twitter, which Snyder promoted. Godot and Affleck were now calling for his cut to be released too. A few days later, Toby Emmerich, chairman of Warner Brothers Picture Group, called Snyder with an offer. Let's try again. A lot of the people at the company, myself included, always felt badly that Zack didn't get to finish his vision of this film because of the circumstances, says Emmerich. And so if there was a way to make it logistically and financially possible, which HBO Max did, and Zack had a willingness to do it, it seemed like a win for everybody. Bruh. Can I just say, Toby Emmerich, I've always respected you. You've produced like 100 movies. And you worked at you worked at New Line, now you're at Warner Brothers. But come on, enough with the BS. This is some bullshit, sir. Let me just say, let's read what Toby Emmerich said. A lot of the people at the company, myself included, always felt badly that Zack didn't get to finish his vision of the film because of the circumstances. No, the circumstances were your circumstances, and he didn't finish the film because of you, and the administration at Warner Brothers lost all faith in him and wanted him gone. Let's be clear on that. And you should be able to admit that now. Just do that, says Emmerich. And so, if there was a way to make it logistically and financially possible, which HBO Max did, and Zack had a willingness to do it, it seemed like a win for everybody. But I got to hand it to Toby Emmerich, because one thing you got to do in Hollywood is be a political animal. And this statement, he comes out and says, and if there was a way to make it logistically and financially possible, which HBO Max did, and Zack had a willingness to do it, it seemed like a win for everybody. Why is that important, the way he put that? Because he didn't ultimately take credit. He gave it to HBO Max. Smart guy. That's why he is where he is. So, Toby, good for you, sir. And I like Frequency. How about that? He wrote it, by the way. He wrote Frequency. Yes, a studio executive like Mike DeLuca writing In the Mouth of Madness. I know Mike DeLuca was not happy with the way the Mike In the Mouth of Madness came out. He wanted it to be a little different. But Mike DeLuca did write In the Mouth of Madness. Toby Emmerich did write Frequency, which is why he was a producer on the TV show too. You got to give it up for any studio executive who is also a creative. So you can't hate Toby Emmerich. Initially, says Snyder, Warner Brothers, I love this part. Initially, says Snyder, Warner Brothers just wanted to release the raw footage that was on his laptop. I was like, this is Zack saying, I was like, that's a no. That's a hard no, Zack says. And they're like, Warner Brothers is like, but why? You can just put up the rough cut. Snyder didn't trust their motivations. I go, here's why. 3 reasons. And I want everybody who's wanted the Snyder Cut to come out. Here's why you do not ever, 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 ever release something that's not finished to your satisfaction. I go, here's why. 3 reasons. 1, you get the internet off your back, which is probably your main reason for wanting to do this. 2, you get to feel vindicated for making things right, I guess, on some level. And 3, you get a shitty version of the movie that you can point to and go, see, it's not that good anyway, so maybe the studio was right. Zack was like, no chance. I would rather just have the Snyder Cut be a mythical unicorn for all time. Snyder estimates that it cost around $70 million to undo Whedon's redo. For that, HBO Max gets 4 hours of hotly anticipated programming and the Hollywood comeback story of a lifetime. Snyder gets himself nothing. I'm not getting paid, he says. He was paid the first time, of course. This time, he wants creative control, and foregoing a fee helped. I'll bet it did. I didn't want to be beholden to anyone, and it allowed me to keep my negotiating powers with these people pretty strong. Fisher, for one, Ray Fisher, was eager to return. There's not a day that's gone by over the last 3 years I haven't thought about this movie, that I have not sat up at night thinking, what if there was a world wherein this thing actually does get released, says the actor, sitting on a set in his grayscale motion capture suit. I probably should have let it go, but there was so much we left behind in this version of the film. It's a completely different movie. As for the fan base, the Snyder movement has contributed $500,000 to the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention through donations, sales of merchandise, and auctions of props. People have been saying, oh, they attack people, says Deborah Snyder, her eyes tearing up. But this fan base has saved lives. As much as they wanted something for themselves, they've come together for this amazing cause. You feel so helpless trying to help someone, and you don't know what to do. It's literally life or death. And I felt like we didn't really know where to turn. Rebuilding the story he had always envisioned is what invigorates Snyder most. He can go as deep and dark as he likes. He can say, to hell with DC's official timeline for the characters and let this alternative version of the Justice League story wind up wherever he pleases. He's put Superman in a sleek black suit instead of the iconic blue and red. He's added the Joker, Jared Leto. He's reshot the ending with a hero cameo that will blow hardcore fans' minds. In what may be a divisive move, he's also presenting the movie in the boxy 4x3 format rather than widescreen so that one day it can be watched on IMAX screens. Some may be irritated by seeing Justice League on HBO Max with black bars on either side. Snyder isn't troubled by that. The director is also layering in some deeply personal elements. The movie closes with Leonard Cohen's Hallelujah, performed by Alison Krauss, a friend who also sang it at Autumn's funeral. It was Autumn's favorite song. Now it's an elegy to her. Justice League, however anyone else feels about it, is made of the things and people Snyder loves too. When you think about the catharsis of it, if I was a potter, I would have made some pottery to look for some way through this, he says. But I'm a filmmaker, so you get this giant movie. He wants people to love it. If some don't, he's all right with that, with all of it. Whatever comes, he's okay. What is my worth? What am I supposed to do? What am I all about? Zack Snyder is answering Autumn's questions for himself. So, I read that. I'm like, oh my God, this is what I got to talk about today. I mean, there's so much information here. There's everything you needed to know about this whole situation is in fact right there for everyone now to know. I think anybody who's wanted this to happen, it is a triumph, I think, for us fans. And I think that it's also, thank God for HBO Max, who saw the value in it. And look, ultimately, I have been an outspoken Man of Steel fan from the very beginning. I love Man of Steel. While I was very disappointed by Batman v Superman. I've often now said after watching the Ultimate Cut, there are still things in it I don't like. I still think it's overstuffed. I would have spent more time with the conflict between Superman and Batman. But the operatic, Wagnerian, and dare I say it because I've been saying it, metal of the entire Zack Snyder vision, I like that I'm getting one man's vision of these characters. I like that we're going to finally have Justice League that Zack Snyder wanted. So, yeah, okay, maybe there's not going to be Justice League 2 or 5 movies, but now Man of Steel, Batman v Superman, which, by the way, the nightmare sequence being tied in, all of that, it's going to feel like one long story. And I, for one, am going to watch it like that, man. I'm going to watch. First time I heard that it's going to debut on HBO Max at, it's what 11 o'clock at night on the 17th on the West Coast or something. That's where it's gonna debut, something like that. Whatever the time is. So it'll be on the 18th, but it starts on the West Coast. I'm taking the day off, yo, and I'm gonna watch Man of Steel. I'm gonna watch Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice, and I'm gonna back time in. I'll give myself some time to get dinner or whatever. I'm gonna have a nice couple bottles of wine, and I'm going to watch all 4 hours of that shit as soon as it drops. I'm going to play it loud. I don't care. It's going to be late at night. I'm very excited for this. And it's a very interesting story. I think there's a lot to be learned here. I don't want to, I vilified people at the studio. I like studio executives. I do. But the thing is, studio executives are different than filmmakers, and it's been the constant struggle. And really, filmmakers are trying to make good movies, which is what you'd think that studio executives want as well. Studio executives want to make movies that make lots of money. And now more than ever, the kinds of money that we're talking about, gone are the days when the studios would make The Matrix for $65 million in 1999 or something like Hunt for Red October, and they would release it, and Matrix would come out, and it could make like $200 million, and that's like a huge win. Those days are over. The number is $1 billion. The money being spent, we're talking hundreds of millions of dollars in marketing and movie making. And it's too bad because there are franchises that have suffered, namely the Star Trek franchise. You don't make a Star Trek movie for $200 million. Ask J.J. Abrams when you meet him, how much did Star Trek Into Darkness really cost? And ask him, do you really think it was smart to make a Star Trek movie for that much money? In Star Trek's whole history in the box office, do you really think spending, $150, $200 million on a Star Trek movie, was that the smartest play? I don't think so. But that's the world we live in. And I think ultimately the story of what happened to Zack Snyder was one where the studio, they fucked him. They fucked him every which way a director can be fucked. And then, to add insult to injury, Zack Snyder had a horrible family tragedy I wouldn't wish on anyone. I wouldn't wish it on anyone. But it happened to him, and he had to endure. But you know what? Thanks to HBO Max, but mostly thanks to a group of dedicated fans. Fans who, after all, they believed in a man, they believed in his vision, and they believed in the movies. That's what makes a film successful. That's what the studios want. What studios really want is ultimately the magic of fandom to make their franchises live and soar. And what the studios need is they need creative visionaries that are working on these projects, and they need to let those creative visionaries make what they can make. Now, this isn't to say there shouldn't be studio oversight, but the studio oversight should come before you get on the fucking set. That's the way these things are done. That's the way they've always been done. And to pretend that you don't know what someone's making, the third film that they've made in their superhero, their Man of Steel trilogy, and how can this movie, we need more humor? Really? Really? Now, like, what are we, halfway through shooting? When Berg and Jeff Johns show up on set to what? I mean, I'd love to see, like, do those guys go in and, like, Zach, I can only imagine. Can you imagine, like, Zack Snyder's directing, and someone says, Zach, I could just see Jeff Johns. Jeff Johns, one of the most humorous, funny, warm human beings in the world, is going to tell Zack Snyder how to inject more humor into his film? Really? Come on, man.